according to my laptop. But anyway, good afternoon. I believe Matt might be remote. This meeting of Lakeland Community College Board of Trustees Finance Audit and Physical Plant Committee meeting is hereby called to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Hebebrand?
Present.
Mr. Rupert?
Yes.
Mrs. Vitas?
Yes. Resolution F3-35, adjusting the rates of tuition commencing fall semester 2025. Mr. Cummings?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. This resolution is a request to increase tuition $5 per credit hour beginning this fall. It's consistent with the state budget bill as introduced. You may recall we begin a new biennium July 1st. We are at the front end of the budget development process for 2026. I'm going to go through that process a little later. And evaluating our starting point, we're recommending the increase in tuition, among several other things to help build next year's budget. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I don't have any questions.
Yeah, I have a few, and I know some of this will probably be answered later in your budget presentation. Would you happen to know off chance how much money the college gets in grants? And these are, I'm not talking about grants for students, I'm talking about grants that we can pay for the college's expenses.
Well, as you do know, the major sources are the state subsidy, the tuition, and the levy income. We do generate a little more from other sources. But those three are probably worth about 95% of the total, I think. Of course, the challenge with grants is they are almost always targeted for a fairly specific purpose. They very little of that really helps with what you consider a general operating budget.
In terms of trying to address a lot of the financial issues, I think grants are an untapped resource that the college has historically failed to take advantage of, and could, potentially when we're talking about, the increases in tuition could be used to offset some of the burden that's placed on these students. The other question I had is, how much money do you know offhand, how much money the foundation has?
I'm sorry, how much money the foundation, did you say adds or
Has.
Has
In general. So the follow-up question will be.
Well, okay, so again, the challenge is there's very little, and I'll be honest, I don't have the figures off the top of my head, but there's very little general unrestricted sources held by the foundation. They do provide the scholarship amounts, which is going from memory, I think in a few $100,000 a year. But those are essentially generated by their endowments. So we do get some money that offsets some student tuition, the eligible students. But otherwise, they cover some of their operating costs, maybe some other very small grants related to faculty projects and so on. But again, from the general operating side, we don't generate income, unrestricted income in the foundation that can then benefit the college.
And the other question I have is, would you be able to provide the comparables for what I would say the actual local institutions that would rival the college? And I'm not talking just about the community colleges, but obviously what Tri-C's comparison is, what Kent State's comparisons are for their Geauga and Ashtabula campuses, what Auburn Career Center's comparables are, and Lake Erie College's comparables.
Yes, I can get that. I have been tracking the obvious ones, the community colleges, but I can get that information.
And just to follow up on that, and how are we tracking the other community colleges? I assume all the community colleges are raising tuition?
It's a little early to say what's going to happen for fall. Last year they did.
So just clarify that, they raised last year when we did not.
Yeah, right. We raised in spring term, so we're a little behind the rest.
Right.
But there's only a couple schools, two-year colleges throughout the state that did not raise last year. Just an educated guess, I would assume we'll see similar this year. Most are going to do something just to, protect their revenue sources if they can, quite frankly.
Matt, do you have anything else?
Those are the rest of my questions. And Chair, do you have any questions?
Are there any other questions? I think
I don't
what
have
Matt was getting at was some of the grants, some of the overhead can be, as you said, the grants are very restrictive, so they really don't contribute to the general fund. But he was kind of concerned that maybe some of the overhead could be allocated to the grants, that we have. So I just think that was part of what he was getting at. Are there any other comments or questions on this?
I just want to make one other comment.
Sure.
As I've made in the past, because the $5 an hour is capped by the state budget, it's if it's not done, it's lost for infinity. So we don't get to recapture it later on, or another semester, or another year. Once we don't do it, it's lost forever. And that's a compounding effect for the college year after year after year after year. So if we don't do it this year, now that's $5 we're behind again next year, and then we're et cetera, et cetera. So that's the problem that I have with not increasing it to $5. I wish we didn't have to do it, but we have to do it because state budget doesn't allow us to ever change that or catch that up later on, and we lose it for infinity, which is a horrible burden to put the college in 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So that's the only comment I have.
Madam Chair, at this point, I would move to table the resolution for the next Finance Committee meeting.
We can't table it because we've got to have it into the budget so that the budget team can have it for the next meeting. So we need to approve this.
I'll take that comment as a second so that we can have a discussion on the tabling.
No, it's not. Matt, don't do your lawyering. It was not a second. I was simply making a comment that we cannot table it because it needs to be in the next meeting. So, Madam Chair, what would you like to do?
This is how parliamentary procedure works, Paul. This isn't about lawyering. If you want to vote against the tabling, you have the right to vote against it. If you want to have a discussion about it, there's a second, and then there's a discussion followed by a vote on the motion table.
Matt, there was no second.
But can I just say something? First of all, we have a motion, and so then is there a second on the motion? Since there is no second on the motion, basically, should there be any we've already had a discussion, so the motion for table is not going forward. Is there a motion to approve the resolution F3-25?
Yes, I'll motion.
I'll second it. Is there any discussion beyond what was already said?
Yes, Madam Chair, I would just like to go on the record saying that I had previously voted against tuition increases, just with an eye towards not causing the students any more financial hardship. However, in our discussions with the budget and looking at hard facts and figures, being under the scrutiny of the audit commission, I've come to the conclusion that really we are directed to do this. And even with an increase, the numbers that I was just looking at show that we're not going to be making a whole lot of money off of this. This is kind of just stabilizing last year's amounts with what we're expecting to have this year due to lower enrollment. That's why the staff is working really hard to boost enrollment. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Can you have a roll call? Oh, go on. Mhm.
Oh, wait, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I would just like to put on the record my thoughts. This is something I want to be able to support, as I've always stated my time period on the board. I see tuition and taxation as part of the same category as having a basis of absolute necessity. And as Janet has articulated, our financial situation indicates that, but I think it's inappropriate to vote at this time at what is the start of the budgeting process. That in any case where you're looking at an absolute necessity, a precondition to that is looking at all other available revenue sources first. And we have two new board members joining the board today, and this is going to be one of their very first votes. I think there's a degree of comedy to them in regards to allowing them the opportunity to learn more about Lakeland before having this be one of their very first votes. We are also in last month the administration announced the intention to engage in a reduction in force. That's a conversation we are going to be having at our full board meeting today. That is going to have implications on our finances and the necessity of the tuition. I think that needs to precede this discussion. And as my prior questioning indicated, I think there are other sources of revenue that the administration needs to look at before we complete this discussion on tuition. Aside from those points of questioning, another thing that we've been talking about is our building needs. We still have an excellent number of buildings, an excellent number of space in general, I should say. I would like to have further discussions on that before voting on this. And for that reason, that's why I wanted to table it. But without the support of the other committee members to table, I regret to say that at this point, I cannot in good conscience support any tuition increase until those preconditions are met.
Thank you, Matt. Is there a roll call, please?
Mr. Hefferbrand,
No.
Mr. Rupert,
Yes.
Mrs. Vitez.
Yes. So the committee's resolution, well, I shouldn't say resolution, but it could be, the committee has supported the resolution to adjust the rates for tuition commencing fall semester 2025 to be presented to the board. Review of the financial report highlights January 31st, 2025. Mr. Cummings, please.
Yes, thank you. The report is rather light, as we've gone through the process of putting together a pretty extensive quarterly report, which last meeting we provided December 31st. So this is as of January 31st. Nothing really new to report. All the trends are continuing. We are actually doing better than budget, but as we've been anticipating, those numbers are going to tighten. So in other words, we're confident that we will stay within budget, which means we'll end positive for the year. But whereas now we're running not well ahead, but a decent amount ahead, that's probably going to continue to tighten and by the end of the year. So for instance, one thing that's affecting us in January, the new health insurance rates went into effect. There's also an additional payment that we owe to the consortium that it happens every year, but it's a timing issue. it starts to close that gap. We're not, our benefits were high for the month of January, in other words. There's a couple other significant expenses that will incur in the next couple months. And so, like I said, we'll stay positive, but the numbers will tighten up as we get closer to June 30th. So unless there's any questions, that's all I have to report on that.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. Are there any questions? Comments?
I have none.
Okay.
None.
Report, go on, Matt.
No other questions or comments from me.
Okay, thank you. Report on purchase orders, bids, and expenditures. Mr. Cummings?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. There's no items that need approval for purchases over $100,000 on this agenda. We do have just one item for information purposes between $25,000 and $100,000. That's the University Hospital contract to provide support to training support, medical training support to our athletics program in the amount of $31,943.
Are there any questions for Mr. Cummings?
I have none.
Okay. Matt, are you fine?
None.
Good.
I'm good.
Somehow oh, here it comes, the screen sharing. The budget process update. Mr. Cummings, please.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to walk you through our process, familiarize you a little bit with how we're going to go about developing the fiscal 26 budget. It is underway. It really started in mid-January with a meeting at the cabinet level to sort of talk through how the process was going to work. It is fairly consistent with how it's been done at least the last few years. Just very quickly, so in early February, spreadsheets were sent out to each organizational manager, which essentially shares with them their 24 actual spending, their 25 budget, and leads to a conversation of where we need to be for fiscal 26. The staff who are responsible for budgeting went through a training session on Monday, February 17th, and since then, they've been meeting with Mike Cooper, who's heading this process. He meets with every organizational manager over a month's time. It's a pretty involved meeting. It's, probably marginally better than root canal for most people, but it's a necessary process to get us make sure we're evaluating what the expenses are that we're going to have to deal with, where there may be opportunities to reduce expenses, and so on. He also uses this as a big part of the process, as you would imagine, to evaluate the current staffing levels, the cost of those levels, and there are situations where either opportunities to save or areas we know we're going to have to make changes. I keep saying we're making decent progress in the fiscal 25 budget. One of the main reasons we're doing that is we've had a pretty decent level of attrition this year, and that's just not going to be sustainable. So those are the kind of things that come up in these budget conversations. So I'm here today just to, if nothing else, assure you that we are taking the process seriously and we're going through it at a pretty robust level. Easy for me to say. Mike Cooper, like I said, is doing most of the heavy lifting. We also have a process in the same timeline for the plant fund, and that's where different organizations can request capitalized equipment or major IT projects, facilities projects, and those are due next week to the VPs for review, and then eventually going over to Mike Cooper. You may recall we have the unrestricted plant fund, and so those will be prioritized and planned within that source, which is separate from the operating fund. But it currently is around in the tune of $1.5 million available for next year. By April 1st, we hope to have the final budget request in. Mike will continue to do his evaluation. We'll get a better sense of where we think we are relative to the revenue sources we have and what people's needs have been identified. There'll be a distinction between what's a continuation, absolutely has to continue, and what is an enhancement, whether it be a new position or that sort of thing. And that'll all be shared with the president by the end of April. And then the cabinet will have some time to evaluate which priorities are going to be funded. Within that process, at the next board meeting, we'll be able to give a little more meat on the bone as far as where we think where we think we are with, if I was sitting next to Kelly, that would have been. We'll get a better sense of where we are fiscally, not only based on the requests and what the input we're getting from the staff, but obviously every week we're evaluating our revenue assumptions and payroll expenses, and you know, that's going to be just an ongoing thing until we get to the end. So we hope to have the budget done by the end of May, with the idea that we'll try to get the budget packet out to the board earlier than the full board packet, giving you a little extra time to review it, with the idea that we will have approved budget at the June 2025 meeting, and then set it up to start fiscal 26 by July 1st. So I wanted to go over that, like I said, give you a sense of how we're approaching this, but also see if there's any other either questions or comments about where input might be needed, or anything else we need to be providing.
I just have one. In the past, I've expressed kind of my disappointment in the budget packet that has been used in the past. That it really has not. That it's given a lot of information, but that information has not been specific in regards to what we're actually spending the money on. That I would like to see a line item budget. Is the budget that we're going to receive, what are your plans in terms of changing that to address those concerns?
You know, that's a good example of why I wanted to get this on the agenda. Both Dr. Ahuja and I, coming from different places, have some thoughts on the current budget book that you've seen the last few years, and some changes we'd like to make. You know, that's good input. I'll be honest, at this point, I probably haven't thought that much about that. I've been thinking more about what are the levels of analysis are going to help the board understand the revenue sources, where they're coming from, how they're impacted. But yeah, I mean, there's room to add more detail than the budget has normally presented.
Matt, we have.
I think it's fair to say that we don't need to know, every single thing that is ever going to be spent over the course of the next year. But what we've gotten in the past has just been one overall number for total expenditure. And we need to look a little bit deeper than that to have a real full understanding of what we're approving. So I appreciate your efforts to revise that system to provide us that detail.
I think we've had more than one number for expenditures. I think the one number was only when we do the resolution to the county. I think we do have general line items, definitely, including compensation, benefits, etc. Maybe we want to break those line items out a little bit more, but
I think we provided those specific numbers after the fact, and kind of a similar format that we have here for the budget status. But I don't think we've been given those numbers as part of the budget when we pass it.
okay. Well, I'm sure Dr. Ahuja and Mr. Cummings will be looking at that and taking your recommendations into consideration. Are there any other comments?
Madam Chair, if I might.
Please.
Mr. Heberbrand, I would just like to address grants. I was on Capitol Hill last week in my capacity as CEO of the National Space Grant Foundation. We flow probably close to $100 million in research, as well as internships, fellowships, and scholarships. I want to make sure we're perfectly clear about what's going on in the grant world and funding. The executive orders from President Trump have put out a very careful and thorough approach to looking at government waste, and it's not that easy that all of a sudden these grants are going to pop up for us to all of a sudden suddenly think that President Ahuja is going to be able to benefit from that. Right now, I have people across the country that are worried about their funding. They're worried about very, very intentional research that impacts groundbreaking things. I have experiments on space station right now that might be in jeopardy of being canceled, and on and on and on. So all I can say is, when you're talking about grants and those kinds of things, a lot of those flow from the federal government. All the federal executives at the highest level, cabinet appointees that I talked to last week when I was in Washington, our own government relations folks are trying to sort this out, dealing with government officials. It's a very trying time in the grant world, so I wouldn't place my bets right now. We have programming that's going on all the way through the end of the fiscal year, and we're concerned about, the president has either had it that it's going to be rescoped, descoped, or canceled, or continued. Those are the 4 different buckets. I saw all these, so please, don't count on grants and what have you to be the president's saving light. I'd ask that our new board members not think that there's some hidden millions of dollars that's going to come. If anything, I'm concerned about cancellation of certain grants and what have you. I have people in the medical community where I spent a whole career in radiology, cardiology, and oncology globally that are worried about their funding for important research. So I would say to this board, let's be careful about thinking that grants and those kinds of things are going to be a safeguard for this institution. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Kevin, we appreciate your input, but I'm sure there's state grants and there's other grants that Dr. Hujan will look at along with Mr. Cummings, and as soon as we have the staffing and the facilities, there will be applications for these grants in the future. Of course, a lot of the other grants that we've had before, we'll still continue looking at with concern. Are there any other comments regarding the budget process?
Madam Chair, if I could just a couple of quick comments on the grants piece and then Trustee Heberbrand's previous comment. Our bandwidth is extremely tight in terms of even the ability to apply for grants. We are looking at extending or expanding that bandwidth just a little bit in the next budget, so we'll talk about that again as a resource conversation for the next budget. I know the federal grants are going to be very tight, but there are some possibilities for states and other things given our profile, but I totally agree with Trustee Freeze that we can't rely on those. The previous point by Trustee Heberbrand on the more itemized budget, Matt, we've talked about that a little bit. David and I, both on the academic side, on the administrative side, you will notice that the budgets, the updates that we've been putting forward are a little more detailed than they used to be in terms of comp and non-comp. But we will try to look at that in terms of what each unit cost benefit on the academic and administrative side, and it's to see whether it's positive or negative as best we can. So that will be on the radar map. I just don't know how quickly we can get to some good numbers on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hujan. And like Mr. Cummings said before, grants are usually for specific purposes, and they definitely don't, they're not really general operating grants in most cases. No. They're for specific programs, and so the cost that goes into a restricted fund, and basically the money that's used has to be spent for that fund. It definitely doesn't go into general operations such as the tuition increase does. Are there any comments and questions? Okay. I guess we can do adjournment. This is a committee meeting like Paul.
Madam Chair, can I just make one more, add an item?
Oh, absolutely. I thought we were done.
No, sorry. I just want to add one item. I first want to apologize to Jay Kahn because I was going to ask him to give us an update at the last finance meeting and I completely forgot. And I apologize for that because I talked to Jay ahead of time and asked him to do that. And for those of you who don't know, he's been giving the Finance Committee a regular update on the engineering building. So Jay, if you could take your 90 seconds and give us an update, the Finance Committee an update on the engineering building, we would greatly appreciate it.
Madam Chair, trustees, President Hujan, it's a very boring update. We're still on schedule and under budget.
We love that. We love boring.
No excitement.
We love boring.
On time and under budget.
Yes, sir.
Excellent update.
That sounds exciting to me.
Sounds like a great update.
Yeah, we've been pretty proactive in reviewing scope and where necessary, drawing that project back to make sure that we cover all our expenses, so.
And we're still on track then for fall.
Oh, yeah.
Excellent.
The president and I just talked about a Labor Day groundbreak, or ribbon cutting.
Groundbreaking.
Yeah, groundbreaking. Project or two.
Great, thank you very much. That's all I had, Madam Chair.
Thank you, trustee.
Is there any other new business or? Hold on. Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn this meeting?
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.